Hi, hello, and a very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Weltsaal, the Chamber of Worlds in the Federal Foreign Office, the traditional location for the German Climate Consortium's COP briefings, always organized in conjunction with the Federal Foreign Office, the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. COP26 is, as you all know, just a couple of days away, and we all know that Glasgow is going to be crucial. It will set the framework for the next 7 years, years that are, according to scientists, the ones that still hold a window of opportunity for reaching the Paris Agreement of keeping global warming to just around 1.5 degrees. But the window is narrowing, as we all know, since the recent IPCC report. And there is a saying by one of the co-authors of the recent IPCC report. She always used to describe global warming as serious, real, and soon. Now, she says, it's very serious, it's very real, and it is now. For many citizens in the developed areas, the threat has come closer. We've now experienced higher incidence of extreme weather results, weather events, storms and floodings on one side, and of course also fires and droughts in areas that didn't used to be hit by that before. And we'll be hearing of some of the key takeaways of the 2021 IPCC report in a moment by the new chairwoman of the German Climate Consortium, Astrid Kiendler-Scharr. But then we'll have two panel discussions, one which is more politically oriented, and the other one will be focusing on those powers that will be the transmission mechanisms if we are going to make it, when we are going to make it. And that's, of course, industry, that's citizens, and we also need the financial industry behind it all. But first of all, let's open up the floor to our hosts and partners in this COP26 briefing. And with that, I'd like to turn around, and I already see a gentleman who didn't have to walk very far. And I say hello to Miguel Berger, State Secretary in the Federal Foreign Office. Great that you're with us here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Jochen Flasbarth, Excellencies, colleagues, dear guests. It is now the 11th time that the Federal Foreign Office welcomes you, together with the Ministry of the Environment and the Deutsche Klima-Konsortium, to a pre-COP briefing. We have a tradition of briefings about the German and EU position before the UNFCCC Conference of the Parties. And we discuss prospects or windows of opportunity for effective global protection with relevant stakeholders. We do so in line with UNFCCC based on the best available science. This is why IPCC lead author Professor Kiendler-Scharr and Professor Pittel, co-chair of the German Advisory Council on Global Change, have a major role in our discussion today. Thank you both for coming. A lot has changed since our first briefing. No doubt, the urgency has increased dramatically. So has awareness. We witness active engagement from all sides of civil society. Scientists, NGOs, pupils like Fridays for Future, citizens' councils, and I welcome Rabea Kos, spokesperson of the Citizen Climate Council. Think tanks, we are grateful that Patrick Reichen from the very well-known Agora Energiewende will join us for the second panel. And last, the economy and the financial sector. It is my pleasure to announce that Melanie Maas-Brunner will represent BASF here today, and Henna Asche, the Bundesbank. Both are crucial actors when it comes to the climate-neutral transformation of our economies. Ladies and gentlemen, since our first briefing in 2010, the European Union and the German government's position on climate change have advanced critically. We have adopted climate laws. The EU has set a target of at least minus 55% by 2030. We are currently negotiating the most comprehensive legislative package to implement it, the so-called Fit for 55 package. And with the Green Deal, the European Union has committed to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050 at the latest. Germany has promised to be climate neutral even by 2045 and to exit coal no later than 2038. But it looks that we might have to and be able to get there much earlier. In April, the German Constitutional Court ruled on the need for more effective climate change and more intergenerational equity, which is why we have intensified our efforts even more. At the same time, the court made clear that national climate policies must be accompanied by international climate diplomacy. My esteemed colleagues Carsten Sach from the Ministry of the Environment and Michael Chlor-Berchtold, head of the Department on Economy and Sustainable Development here at the Federal Foreign Office, will discuss our government's new approach on climate foreign policy with you. Something has not changed in your presence and active participation. I thank you all for your long-standing commitment, for your perseverance despite all the setbacks. I am convinced we have to work even harder. We have made it to Paris, we will make it to Glasgow and beyond. This virtual room is a proof of the power of innovation, courage, information and commitment combined. In this spirit, I wish you a very interesting discussion and inspiring discussion during our pre-COP event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And under normal circumstances, of course, we would hear the applause. But ladies and gentlemen, of course, it being a digital and hybrid event, we do have actual speakers here. And I'm very, very happy to welcome our next speaker, who's not just been with his present employer for the last 2 decades, but who's an experienced and well-versed COP veteran, I might say. And for both COP processes, both the biodiversity and also for the COP now running up to COP26, and you've been actually quite instrumental certainly from the German side that COP20, whatever it was in Paris, was as great as it was. So welcome with me and give him an applause, even though we can't hear it. Jochen Flasbarth, State Secretary in the Federal Ministry of the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for such a nice announcement. Although being a veteran has something positive, but it tells also something about the age, which might not be so positive. Dear colleague Miguel Berger, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, really a pleasure to be here in the Weltsaal. As has been said, usually we gather here in person, and now it's still due to the pandemic virtual. This briefing for the COPs, as has been said already by my dear colleague, has a very good tradition. Together with the Foreign Ministry, the German Klima-Konsortium, we do it always prior to the COPs. And I just will outline the scene setting for the COP in Glasgow. I know there are lots of quite negative news around in the world. We have just heard that we had the highest CO2 emissions in the atmosphere ever. We heard just today, I guess, in the media that it was the hottest year in Asia, and we all saw all the catastrophes during the last year in my country, but also in other regions of the world. So it's not good. The planet is under danger. That's very obvious, and science is telling us constantly. But still, for this briefing, I want to draw a little bit nicer, more optimistic picture. Looking back to the Paris Agreement, it was in 2015 in Paris COP21. We were able to decide on a new legal architecture for global climate policy, outlining what we have to do mutually, collectively in the world, but also what each country has to do individually following its own climate policies and national determined contributions. And this was all supposed to lead to a world to keep the climate global warming well below 2 degrees, better below 1.5 degrees. And that 1.5 degrees was at that time something like a political insurance for the most vulnerable countries, the small island states. It was not really the target for the Paris Agreement. That changed after the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees, outlining that a 1.5 world is substantially different from a 2 degrees world and definitely not desirable. So now we have a situation where more or less the 2 degrees target is deleted and we are all going for the 1.5 degree. I don't hear anyone in the world seriously saying that we should not aim at the 1.5. And we saw a lot of development. Look, in a few months prior to Paris, in Elmau, the G7 decided to decarbonize their economies in the second half of the century. Now all of the G7 countries are committed to carbon neutrality, greenhouse gas neutrality by 2050. We saw the announcement from China, carbon neutrality by 2060, Australia, Russia for 2050. This is really a tremendous step forward. I know it's not enough, but it's a positive movement, and that is a momentum that has been used already by the UK presidency. So the success of Glasgow is not only something that is made in Glasgow itself, it's also already in the run-up to Glasgow. Moving to another area on which I was working together with my dear colleague Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister for Environment in Canada, is on the global finance for developing countries, climate finance for developing countries. You all know there was a pledge from Copenhagen for 100 billion. It entered into the Paris package, decision package, that developed countries will supply 100 billion as of 2020 until 2025. We are all aware, and it's outlined in Jonathan's and my reports, that we didn't reach it in 2019. We will not have reached it in 2020 and also not in 2021. Maybe we touch at the 100 billion in 2022, but we definitely will surpass it in 2023, 24, and 25. So this is, yes, honestly, not what we promised, but still it's a success and definitely what we saw, the pledges that were coming in during the last weeks and months. And this should all put us in a positive spirit for a constructive conversation in Glasgow. My last point, there's something to do in Glasgow. We have to finalize the rule book, the common time frames, and the transparency issue. All this, well, it's solvable. I saw more difficult problems on the table in the past. And we have Article 6, something sensitive we have to fix in a very credible way so that cooperation under Article 6 can happen. And that is maybe the most challenging point we have to fix in Glasgow. I'm sure we will do it. And with this, I wish this briefing meeting here, this virtual one, a very success. Thanks.
And before you run away, we've been listening on to into the press conference that you held yesterday, and you've just talked about the climate finance delivery plan. One of the takes that you said, one of the reasons why there is a gap was because you didn't harness enough private monies. How do you expect to do that in the next couple of years in order to come up to the promises?
Well, as I was working on that subject, I got a bit deeper into it, and there are positive and negative parts of the story. One positive part is that the leverage factor was lower than we expected because a lot of investments, for example, in renewable energy, do not need any public seed money at all. any longer. So it's a business case already, and that's, of course, a positive story. But there are also negative parts. There are obstacles in the developing countries side themselves, but also on the developed countries side to make it easier for the private sector to enter into this business, to be, well, the new normal, to invest in green products, in green systems.
I remember from yesterday also that you said one beautiful sentence: it's not a question of charity, it's not a question of just being nice, it's a question of utmost necessity. Could you put that into your own words again?
Yeah, that is how I see it. We should not have, as developed countries, the attitude of generosity. Look, we in the North, we are providing the money to the global South. It is not how the world works. It's a question of fairness. It's also a question of responsibility if you look at the historic emissions. And still, it's good that a lot of countries took that responsibility. And I think with this delivery plan, as I said it yesterday, it's good enough. Yesterday I said it's not too bad to have a very positive and constructive spirit in Glasgow.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Have a really great day and lots of energy for the next COP.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Jochen Flasbarth. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as we are heading to our first keynote speech, which will be very, very welcome, I just would like to point out that maybe climate science has gotten a certain sort of golden crown this year, simply because climate science breakthrough actually got the Nobel Award for physics. We had 3 physicists praised by the Nobel Committee, Mr. Manabe, Klaus Hasselmann, the German colleague, and Giorgio Parisi. And the point is that both Manabe and Hasselmann have created computer models that nowadays are sort of the run-of-the-mill toolbox for global scientists, climate scientists everywhere. And maybe that's a great run-in to another great scientist deeply involved in modeling. Now, you will know that the IPCC report was labeled with a code red this year when it came out as far as global warming is concerned. Therefore, as Jochen Flasbarth just pointed out, we have this run to actually concentrate on 1.5 and no longer on the 2-degree goal. And one lady actually participating and writing an important chapter in this and previous reports is Astrid Kiendler-Scharr. She is the lead author of the chapter Short-Lived Climate Forces in this 6th assessment report, and she's here with us now. I'm going to roll out the red or the blue carpet, whichever one you want, or the cryoscene, and the last words for me to say: Professor Astrid Kiendler-Scharr is IPCC lead author, and she's the new chairwoman of the German Klima-Konsortium Forschungszentrum Jülich. And enjoy your next 15 minutes with us and educate us well. Thanks
a lot. Thanks for this opportunity to give you some headline statements of the IPCC report. What are the key messages of this latest report on the scientific basics? Well, one of the key messages certainly is recent changes in the climate are widespread, they are rapid and intensifying, and they are unprecedented in thousands of years. So this is substantiated in a figure in the summary for policymakers where we depict the temperature development of the last 2,000 years. You can nicely see this last period of roughly 150 years where the temperatures suddenly rise, and they rise above a temperature that has been seen for the last hundreds of thousands of years. If we look into how can we explain this temperature change, this is actually, and being able to do this figure was part of why the Physics Nobel Prize was granted this year. So what is shown here is the black observation of temperature. Then you can see the blue. This is what would have occurred if only natural influences had been there. And the orangey band shows you what we can explain, taking into account human influence in addition. So you can see here that only accounting for human influence, we can really explain the temperature change that we have experienced since the pre-industrial. It is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change. This is one of the key messages of this latest IPCC report. And what does that mean? It does mean that temperature changes are attributable to the greenhouse gas emissions that we are causing, and part of that warming that the greenhouse gases cause is masked by aerosols. This is depicted here on the right-hand side of the figure, where the reddish bars are the greenhouse gas warming contributions, and the bluish is the cooling from the aerosols. What I want to emphasize here is we have heard about pledges to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees. Where we already stand is a warming of 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial times. So if we wish to keep global warming at or below 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial, there is only 0.4 degrees additional warming that we can tolerate. This is something to bear in mind. Another part why this Physics Nobel Prize was granted is that we can attribute the warming to the greenhouse gases, and we can assign which greenhouse gas is contributing which part of the warming. And this is detailed here in this figure. What you can see on the very left-hand side is the bar that is caused by the CO2. CO2 is the greenhouse gas that every one of us is aware is causing a problem. And it is the biggest problem, not only because the bar of the CO2 is causing the largest warming contribution, but also because CO2 stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So once we emit it, the warming that it causes will be there for hundreds of years. Next to the CO2 is the bar of methane. Methane is a so-called short-lived climate forcer. That means it stays in the atmosphere for on the order 10 to 12 years. It is transformed through atmospheric chemistry into CO2 and causes already a warming of 0.5 degrees. Climate change is already affecting every region on Earth, making extreme climate events more frequent and more severe, and the changes we experience will increase with further warming. This is shown here in a summary for policymakers, figure 6, where you can see that the extreme events, heat extremes, that would have been there once every 10 years, already at present 1 degree warming will be there roughly 3 times in 10 years. Whereas if you keep warming, the frequency will increase. At a 4 degree warmer world, we would have almost every year such an extreme event. But also the event itself will become more extreme. So a heat wave will become much hotter, and that is also causing trouble. Unless there are immediate, rapid and large reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees will be beyond reach. And you heard there are pledges to become CO2 neutral by the mid of this century. This is also needed. All the scenarios that we explored do show that only if we reach CO2 neutrality and go to negative CO2 emissions by the mid of the century, there will be a chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. In addition, the warming and limiting warming needs strong, rapid, and sustained reductions in CO2, but also in methane and other greenhouse gases. And the CO2, the methane and other greenhouse gas reductions would not only reduce consequences of climate change, but also improve air quality. That is because the atmospheric chemistry of methane leads to ozone formation, one of the key air pollutants that we struggle with in polluted urban areas, for instance. And so in summary, it has to be emphasized that while there are goals set and there are pledges, We need to bear in mind that a goal that is not laid out with a path how to reach it is only a wish. And if I would have a wish to make, I would hope that COP26 will be able to come up with a concrete plan of how to reach climate neutrality and CO2 neutrality by the mid of the century. Thank you very much.
And with that, I sort of simulate the applause for that. Would you mind already sort of moving into the panel situation? And ladies and gentlemen, there is one thing we have still before we're starting the panel, because we do have opening remarks. As you might imagine, everybody who is in the presidency of COP26 has their hands full and probably also their ears full with talks. So as a replacement for Alok Sharma, we have for the COP presidency the British ambassador to Germany, Jill Gallard, who has done this pre-recording, which is more than greeting words.
Dear State Secretary Berger, State Secretary Flasbarth, dear ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, many thanks for giving me the opportunity to share a message from the presidency for this conference. My name is Jill Gallard. I'm the British Ambassador to Germany. The UK, in partnership with Italy, is proud to be hosting COP26. This conference comes at a crucial moment at the beginning of a decisive decade. The science is clear. We need to act immediately, urgently, and at scale to address the climate crisis. You'll be hearing from IPCC lead author Professor Kiendler-Scharr about the latest science shortly, so I will focus on what the UK is expecting from COP26. Our presidency is pursuing 4 main goals. Goal 1, mitigation. More than 70 countries have come forward over the past 2 years with updated and more ambitious nationally determined contributions, including all of the G7. The European Union put forward ambitious targets last year, and the German government has sent a strong signal of increased ambition by aiming for climate neutrality by 2045. But we need the same ambition globally, particularly from the remaining G20 countries. Goal 2, adaptation. Even if we stopped emissions rising today, we'd still need to deal with extreme weather and climate-related shocks. We've seen stark evidence of this across Europe this summer. We need all countries to scale up public and private finance for adaptation and improve access to finance. We also need to pay greater attention to loss and damage, integrating finance and action across adaptation, disaster prevention and response. The UK has, with partners like the Netherlands, Bangladesh and Malawi, launched the Adaptation Action Coalition to strengthen work in this area. It now has 38 members. Goal 3. Mobilise finance. Both mitigation and adaptation require substantial capital. Developed countries must deliver on their promise to mobilise $100 billion per year in climate finance for developing countries. Germany, the UK, Canada, Japan and the US have pledged new money, but we need more. We're extremely thankful to State Secretary Jochen Flasbarth and Minister Wilkinson from Canada for their work on a delivery plan for how developed countries will deliver the $100 billion a year. We also need to unlock private finance from new members of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Goal 4, collaboration. We must finalise the Paris rulebook as part of a successful negotiated outcome in Glasgow. Remaining negotiating topics, such as Article 6 and common timeframes, must be resolved to unleash the full potential of the Paris Agreement. At the same time, our collaborative efforts need to go beyond the negotiations to show that we're driving forward on-the-ground action. Governments, business and civil society need to work together to catalyse transformation in every sector of the economy. It's been heartening to see recent bottom-up support in Germany from business, cities and regions joining the UN Race to Zero initiative. To drive real economy action, the UK presidency has also launched a number of key COP26 campaigns, which we have summarised as coal, cars, cash and trees. Coal, because our Prime Minister is adamant that Glasgow should be the COP that consigns coal to history. We're working hard with our partners to end international coal financing. We're urging countries to abandon coal power in the 2020s already, and we're working with developing countries to support their transition to clean energy. Cars, because the transition to zero-emission road transport technology has reached a tipping point. It's inevitable, underway and accelerating. Finance, I've already spoken about. Trees. The UK is putting forests and land use front and centre by hosting a leader-level event at COP26. Our objective is for leaders to sign up to a declaration to halt and reverse deforestation, underpinned by concrete policy commitments. We recognise this is a long and ambitious list of objectives, but let me conclude by assuring you that my government is 100% committed to hosting a physical and inclusive COP. We need to come together in person to achieve the much-needed progress. The UK has also been designing the summit to ensure that the voices of young people, Indigenous people, women and civil society will be heard. We're funding a pavilion for the Indigenous Peoples Forum on climate change. We're hosting a designated Gender Day. And we're working with young people to host a Youth and Public Empowerment Day. All of these are critical and inspirational voices that we must listen to. The title of today's event, A Window of Opportunity for Swift Action, is well chosen. Glasgow is a window of opportunity to put the world on track to deliver on climate. Many thanks for your attention, and I wish you an excellent conference.
Thank you, Jill Gallard, there for actually bringing to the front of our minds the 4 goals for COP26 in Glasgow. And I have an esteemed panel here. We already know Astrid Kiendler-Scharr, and we have been joined here. You probably didn't have to walk that far. Ambassador Dr. Hinrich Tölken, the Director for International Climate and Energy Policy and Digital Transformation here at the Foreign Office. I already see he is with us digitally, Dr. Carsten Sach of the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. Great that you're with us. Oh, and last minute, he's there, Nick Bridge, the UK Special Representative for Climate Change. So wonderful, Nick, that you're there. And Carsten, really, really happy that you're with us digitally. So let me kick off. Jill has already put out a couple of issues. And Nick, you as the UK Special Representative for Climate Change have a very important role in Glasgow, but you must also feel the burden. Right at the moment, we are at a trajectory of 1.1. In Germany, it's 1.6, and we all want to end up at 1.5. How are you going to do that? What's ahead for you? What's the greatest challenge in Glasgow?
Well, thanks very much for this event and for having me, and best wishes from the COP President, Alok Sharma. I won't repeat what Ambassador Gallard said in terms of the goals, but let me try to elaborate and bring it forward into this conversation. It's fantastic to see Carsten and Hinrich and the other colleagues on the line. You know, there's a baseline around COP26, which is the negotiation. The Paris rules have to get done. And there's various elements still outstanding that many of us know about, whether it's around making the international carbon market function, dealing properly with the question of loss and damage and adaptation, and how we set our goals and standards going forward with COPs. So all kinds of very technical and very important rules that must get done between the negotiators. But the thing that we've tried to do in addition, and Jill mentioned some of this, is in one way show that this now is not just a political agenda as it was in Paris, where all the countries commit, but that it's a society-wide agenda and an economy-wide agenda. And that's why we're bringing, hopefully, great new additional focus on the energy sector, the transport sector, the nature, agriculture, land use sector, and to show actually that even since 5 years ago, there has been an enormous shift in the market conditions and in society, which says there is now no reason not to do this. There is every reason for economic well-being, for jobs, environment, air quality, and all of this, as well as all the science we've heard about, the absolutely alarming catastrophic scenarios if we don't act faster. So the economics has changed. And that's why we're trying to bring to the table much more clearly big shifts in those sectors. And that's not just about governments, it's about businesses. Many of them are ahead of governments. And it's about civil society. And it's about the kind of things that can clean up the global economy fast. Now, the reason I mentioned that, the negotiations, and then the real economy stuff, is that unless you've created a sense in the real economy and in society that it makes sense, and it's cheaper and it's healthier and it's more prosperous and it's better for jobs, unless you've got that narrative, you cannot achieve the uplift in ambition and concrete commitments that you need. And so I finished just this section by saying the way that we're trying to get support from partners is to really lock in that net zero as absolutely irreversible, and then come back from 2045, 2050, 2060 net zero and say, okay, governments, we've nearly all signed up to net zero. It now has to be reflected in 2030, in the nationally determined contributions of 2030 as well. And so we're in the midst of this process. So Glasgow is about locking in that net zero. In the last couple of years of our presidency, we began with about a quarter of the world committed to net zero. We're now at around 80% of the world. That is a phenomenal shift in quite a short time towards net zero. So that is really, really well advanced. We've got more work to do, though, on the 2030 target, especially in the G20. So big focus on these three areas: negotiations and balancing those negotiations, delivering the finance for the poorest and most vulnerable countries, doing the adaptation and funding that, and supporting countries, and then getting the emissions curves bending both through targets that I've mentioned and through real economy change to show that this is happening, it's irreversible, and it's good for us all. So those are sort of some of the elements that we try to hold together in a balance at the event, recognizing that in particular, our focus is on those who are already suffering the most and who are least resourced to deal with the challenges. That's always at the front of our minds, and including in that is whether it be indigenous communities, those protecting land, and the young people's voice. So a big focus on lifting on Italy and doing a big focus on the young people's voice as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You actually tweeted about the youth impetus that you just got, and I'd like to pick you up on those issues later. Now, on the way to Carsten Zach, I'd like you, ladies and gentlemen, who are watching us right at the moment, to know that you can actually put your comments, your questions to us, and they will be relayed. So, yes, we will be able to feed them into our discussion at a later point. But right now, I'd like to address Carsten Zach. And Carsten, I think the State Secretary was a bit upset when I said he was a veteran, but I know that you've been in the COP process for ever since the first COP. So I'm not going to use the word veteran anymore, but from your point of view, personally, what is the big and the decisive fact now at COP26 in Glasgow? What needs to be happening from your point of view? And the second thing is, we seem to be sort of, between these windows of opportunities for the next 7 years and the fact that, for example, the G20 still are not living up to it, and that the figures do not match the aspiration. So what do we do?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And Nick already framed it very nicely, I would say. In Glasgow, it is about ambition, about solidarity, and it's about cooperation. And that's necessary to build the trust in the development which we need to get to net zero. We also have some negotiations, but I think the other three aspects are at the forefront. So what does that mean? On ambition, most of ambition happens not in the negotiations, but within countries, or for us within Europe. But Glasgow can empower us to do more. So ambition means that we move forward net zero pledges, that we have concrete plans how to fulfill it, because only if we deliver within countries net zero plans, strategies where stakeholders in society and in industry know what to do or what are the next steps, we can deliver. And only then we create the important momentum that we need to act now in this decade in order to keep 1.5 within reach. The second big issues, we did promises, and Jochen Flasbarth pointed that out towards developing countries. I think it's good that we have this delivery plan now being published yesterday. It is operationalizing it. I think we got additional pledges, which is good, but we didn't fully deliver. And I think now it's important that we give signals that we deliver as soon as possible. But having said that, as important as this public money is to get the fundamentals of the financing system right, we need to become much more clever, and Nick mentioned that as well, that our financing is really geared towards future investments which we need to reach in net zero. The last point I would like to say is on the famous rulebook, where we need some important aspects to be finalized now. Of course, it is important that we get really markets in which we can trust, which spur cooperation amongst civil society, amongst companies, amongst countries, that there is no double counting. And within these markets, we need clear rules and transparency. And transparency is my catchword. We can only trust each other if we are all transparent and really putting forward what we are doing and where we are still struggling to deliver. And only if we put that forward, how can we organize from other countries, from companies, from partners around the world. So Glasgow needs to finish unfinished business, but it needs to open up by concrete initiatives. That 1.5 will still be in reach, but all what Jill Gallett and Nick said and the state secretaries and others probably is the right framing for Glasgow.
Thank you very much for this kickoff, Carsten Sach. And I'm turning to the gentleman between the two ladies. It's not very often that we can actually say that. Ambassador Hinrich Tölken, now it's really down your line of work, what we're discussing now. But as opposed to the BMU, i.e. the environmental, you are actually talking about diplomacy, climate diplomacy. Of course, that's what's going to happen in Glasgow on one side. But of course, we don't have to wait for COP to make that happen. In fact, with the change or with the reprimand by the German High Court of, let me say, giving German climate policy a push in a friendly way, you were actually asked to engage higher in climate diplomacy with two aspects. A, get the ones that aren't in, but who can pay into the system, more into the system, and the second one is distribute better. And we've already have a question for you later on about potential conflicts, but we'll leave that for later. So could you give us the two areas where high engagement of the Foreign Office is important?
Yeah, thank you. Let me first start by saying that I especially like the sentence that you made earlier. You said a climate goal without a path is just a wish. I think this is a key sentence that also we need to reflect always in our dialogues and consultations with other countries, because we see some ambitious goals, but we lack the path. to see that these goals are actually implemented. So what do we do? As the Foreign Office is not negotiating in the federal government, this is led by the Federal Ministry of the Environment, we are preparing the ground for successful COP meetings. So we jointly with our colleagues from the Federal Ministry of the Environment and the Ministry of Economic Cooperation have set together to define our common climate diplomacy rulebook, so to say. How do we do it? How can we best coordinate? How can we make sure that we have uniform messages when talking to the key G20 players or to other countries? And this is what we do. Just this morning, we had a call about what are we going to do in our partnership with Indonesia, the incoming G20 chair, because we will be the G7 chair next year. Indonesia will chair the G20 process. So this is an interesting constellation. And we want to find out, is there anything that we could do together? We can share perhaps goals. We can stimulate each other in being more ambitious about climate policies. When it comes to preparing a meeting such as the COP conference, of course, very much is happening on a European level. So we coordinate our efforts with our European partners, amongst the climate ambassadors, with the European External Action Service. So we talk about how to target those countries where we see the biggest need for more ambition, where we would feel this would be extremely helpful to see higher NDCs. And we've done this with a number of countries. And I'm very happy to state that some of these countries have actually come up with new NDCs. I'm not saying this is because we did this enterprise, because we talked to them, but certainly it was not harmful to the, let's say, raised ambition that we see here. But let me also point out one other aspect that is getting more and more important for our work in the Foreign Office, and this is really the diplomatic, foreign and security policy part of climate change. We see, we are serious about it, that climate change is not only a threat multiplier, it's an actual concrete risk to stability and to peace and to good cooperation on this planet. We have therefore seized the United Nations Security Council already twice. Last time when we were in the Security Council in 2020, we have held debates there. We have in 2011 agreed on a presidential statement. And our idea is to make the Security Council aware of this conflict, additional stress multiplier, of this potential additional conflict reason, and to make sure that any preventive action that could possibly be taken is also done at the United Nations Security Council level and other organizations and fora, of course. So this is also one of the key areas of our work. And to put it very short, climate change and security implications, this is pure foreign policy. Climate outreach, speaking to countries to raise their ambitions, is helpful for climate policy. So we do both.
We're going to get back to the crisis and of course, the conflict area. Also, there is a dedicated question already from our cherished audience. But I'd like to get Astrid back into the conversation. Now, first of all, scientists these days are looked upon with different eyes than before. Beforehand, before COVID-19, it seemed like sort of, you're doing wonderful work and nobody's really looking, nobody's really listening. First of all, do you perceive that whatever, not just the IPCC, but also on a national level, whatever scientists are saying as far as climate warnings are concerned, as climate facts are concerned, they're being received and being listened to both on the diplomatic, on the political, but also in other areas?
Yes, I do think that the setting in terms of awareness, how important an issue climate change is, did change in the last couple of years. There is certainly the strong voice of the youth, which did help in making society more aware of climate change really posing a problem, and posing a problem for perspectives for young people now. But there is also the element, of course, that IPCC has been tasked in providing assessment reports for decades now. And this is something that the policy makes a wish to be informed. They do want the scientific evidence to be there and ask for the input, for the assessment, to inform them in order to really base their decisions unscientific evidence. So yes, science is heard and wanted in this society, and that is something good to know.
Looking at the facts and figures, and you've transported quite a bit of what IPCC was saying in a nutshell. Are there still any low-hanging fruit around?
Well, probably as a lead author of the short-lived climate forces chapters, I have to think so and emphasize this. I think really focusing to some extent on the mitigation and reduction of methane emissions is one thing that could be considered a low-hanging fruit in the sense that because methane is short-lived, once we reduce methane emissions, the radiative forcing from the methane, the warming effect of the methane, does decrease relatively rapidly. And so if we manage to reduce methane emissions, which primarily come from fossil fuel production and distribution, agricultural practice, and waste management. If we manage to reduce the methane emissions of these three sectors, then we will see an effect relatively quickly.
So an old issue that everybody knew about with a new focus, but there's hope to be had. Nick, I already had a question that has disappeared, so I'm not going to ask that to you because that's now a question by a climate scientist. Nick, there are two aspects to COP26. The one aspect is that you and other sponsors are dedicated to getting in as many different groups as well, not just the politicians. Of course, there's the political, diplomatic track, but then you have a dedicated gender day. You have sort of an emulation of the Milan experience, Youth for Climate. You have a number of issues, indigenous people, with a special and dedicated area and dedicated conference part. Why this opening up that seems to be going beyond what other COPs have done?
Well, quite simply, our colleague has described the scientific imperative and the trajectory that we are on, and we have to deliver on everything that we've promised through the previous COP processes, but it's not enough. So, as I tried to describe before, the first thing is that everybody has to feel and to see that this process engages them, meets their very high expectations. And the negotiations are crucial on the rulebook and crucial on setting the next phase of COP discussions, but that's not enough. People are needing to see a level of emissions peaking and reduction. They're needing to see that we understand the linkages to the ecosystems, to biodiversity, to sustainable development. We've already got all the sustainable development goals. Climate is just one of them. So people are needing to see that they can relate to the COP from wherever they are sitting, in whichever country, city, region, community, ethnicity. And so I think COPs have always had this big effort. We're not the first, but I think we have tried to take it to the next level in terms of binding, for example, businesses. We have set up a very hopeful process of race to zero for businesses. So not just governments now. The governments can't get there if the businesses are not delivering on this. And so that's why we're trying to create, something that everyone can relate into, because just completing the regular negotiations, difficult as they are, will not meet the need. So I think that's the spirit, is that now that we have these very powerful arguments, and Carsten, he was very closely involved in IRENA and all of the renewable energy, and Germany was such a leader in this field, and now together we're in the North Sea doing offshore wind. We have the economic certainty that this is the only pathway, and we need to bring that into the COP conversation, because it's the only way that we'll raise the ambition and raise the concrete plans. And you know, and then just finally, I think in terms of the asks of all countries, this is an ask of all countries, but some countries are bigger emitters and have more responsibility than others. But basically what we now need, as we heard very clearly, I like that phrase again, you know, as you said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. We tried in our net zero strategy this week in the UK to say, okay, in very clear terms, these are the 5-year budgets all the way to net zero. These are the steps in every sector that we must take. And these are the detailed policy commitments that get us there. And we all need, you know, and we still haven't got enough of those plans, but we've got a lot more of the plans month by month. So we need to urgently see that the commitments now have a plan underpinning them. And that includes the plan to support the poorest and most vulnerable countries. And I would just say, if you forgive me just a moment longer, you know, in talking about the obligation to support all countries, we've been incredibly grateful to Germany, and particularly Minister Flasbarth and his Canadian colleague for the work they've done to help us get the 100 billion number into a better place. Carsten put it very well. We have not met the 2020 promise for the 100 billion, but we will get there soon after, and then it will continue to build rapidly after that. And we have to show that that is growing all the time. Second, we have to show the money is also building in the private sector. The whole financial system more generally is shifting to sustainable investments only by 2030. But third, this money has to have impact, and it has to genuinely support the countries that need access to it. And we've worked with Germany very successfully over the years with building NDC partnerships, with supporting access to finance, and that will continue. So this is very much a European endeavor. It's a European COP. It's our turn. We've got Italy as our co-partners as well. And really every country in Europe, you know, we need to pull together, step up, and lead this as we did in Paris with support of many other countries.
Thank you so much, Nick, for that. And we had earlier Jochen Flasbarth talking about the contributions and how to get actually to the 100 billion that were promised, and of which only 80% had been delivered. Now, Carsten, right before COP26, we're going to have the G20 meeting, and of course, finance and climate finance is going to be a part of it there. How do you see the readiness and the connection between the last big conference of the Italian G20 presidency and the COP? How can we get these 80% of economic power into the COP20 process, and how can we actually make sure that the right message comes from Rome?
First, it's not by chance that the G20 summit is directly before the high-level event which the UK presidency of COP26 is organizing. So you get probably more heads of state and government to Edinburgh, to Glasgow, because we have the G20 summit. The second one is you put part of the COP agenda automatically into the summit. I think that's good. But we also have some restriction in the G20 nowadays. You see geopolitical tensions between certain powers in the world, in particular in Asia, and therefore progress in the G20 is never easy. But one big advantage of the Leaders Summit is that the leaders take responsibility for this important aspect of climate change. So it is more a whole of government approach, and therefore it's good. What I expect is clear language on 1.5. I hope that we get progress on scrapping, in my words, perverse subsidies, so fossil fuel subsidies, that we get language which will be difficult with partners like Russia, China, South Africa, Brazil, and others on board, which leads open towards shifting out of coal and fossils. So it is about commitments of heads of state, which will be a little bit more generic on what we will see in Glasgow later on. But I think that's the way we built the constituency for going ahead. Let me compare that with Europe. It was a great move at the beginning of the lifetime of this commission that they committed to greenhouse gas neutrality and for delivering a package which we now call Fit for 55. And sometimes we are complaining about certain countries in Europe who think, who the public thinks are laggards. But I think I would take the positive point. Because we are forced to unanimity in many reasons, we are forced to cooperate, we are forced to convince each other. I think that's the strength of Europe, even if it's sometimes cumbersome. We become some kind of a role model in the world that we need to talk to the others, have a certain kind of competition. We need front runners in each system, but on the other hand, we need to get everybody with us. And I think that's, so Europe is quite a good picture for what we are dealing with in Glasgow as well.
Thank you very much. Now I'm already looking at my iPad on which I find a number of questions to everybody. But let's kick off with you, Hinrich. And we've had the question, or you've already touched upon the fact that with increased pressure due to climate changes, people will migrate and conflicts will arise where conflicts haven't been, or conflicts that are already there on the ground will be exacerbated. So how, apart from, of course, taking the issue to the UN Security Council, how do you propose from a foreign ministry point of view to take that issue forward and to keep it in borders?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Of course, we know historically many of the wars that have been fought in Europe or elsewhere have been fought about access to resources. And global warming will shake up access to resources for many countries. If we talk about water, shared river basins, we talk about, let's say, exclusive economic zones, access to resources in the sea, like fish stocks or minerals, it's about energy and so on. So what we need to do is we need to understand what exactly will be the effects of a global warming, of changed weather patterns, changed access to resources. What does it mean for cooperation or hostilities between countries? What kind of, let's say, local or regional trends might we see? And this is where we need more wisdom, we need more know-how, more expertise. And this is why the Federal Foreign Office commissioned a study, a big expertise, which is called Weathering Risk. Funny name, but I like it. And which is due to come out next year, 2022, when we have the G7 presidency. And this study will help us to understand what exactly is there that we must expect in terms of changing international relations related to global warming, and what could be the possible policy answers and policy recommendations to governments. So this is very concrete. I do not have the knowledge as of now because still the work is ongoing, but it's undertaken by an international consortium of think tanks. It includes, for example, the Potsdam Institute for Climate here in Germany, but also others, international partners. And I'm very curious to see what comes out of it. And of course, naturally, the new incoming government might want to look at the agenda for our G7 presidency, and it would be no surprise to me if climate would figure high up on that agenda.
Thank you very much. And I think, Astrid, that question is dedicated to you from John Smith, climate scientist. Not quite sure whether that's a synonym or real name. John Smith sounds almost like a synonym. So, John, if that's your proper name, please forgive me. But the question is, with respect to transparency and trust, in reality, he believes 1.5 is no no longer in reach. No relevant emitter is on track for that. Net zero until 2050 is not sufficient for that because of the carbon budget. Might it actually be a hindrance that everybody believes we can still do it and that 1.5 is realistic, or should we not change and be honest? Again, the question and the alarm bell that the best possible outcome is 1.7 and only that with most radical action.
So it is certainly fair to state that at the moment we are rather on track for a 3-degree warming by the end of the century. And it does need strongest ambitions to keep global warming well below 2 degrees. What I did show is that with every 1/10 of a degree warming, additional warming, extreme events become more extreme and more frequent. And so no matter what, limiting global warming as much as we can is certainly the goal at stake. And I think in that regard, it is not so much of an issue if by the end of the century we will have achieved 1.5, 1.6 or 1.7 degrees. The thing is that we really need to raise ambitions to be as ambitious as possible because we will need to be climate neutral, CO2 neutral on that pathway. If we do not achieve net zero emissions, we will not be able to go well below 2 degrees. And that is the emphasis we have to put here.
Thank you, and therefore maybe look at our communication. Now there's a specific and dedicated question to Nick Bridge, and it's by Stefan Bauer, who's working for the German Development Institute. He is actually asking, or actually stating, first of all, moving from 25 to 80% of countries pledging to net zero signals considerable progress, and I believe we've just had Turkey chipping in, we've just had Australia chipping in, countries that were holding sort of the handbrakes. But going back to the question, but how will the UK presidency prevent the remaining 1/5 from impending COP26 outcomes, given the consensus-based mode of UN negotiations?
Thank you. And I also, if I may, just link my answer to the earlier question, because for us, 1.5 and keeping it alive, really is, as always, grounded in the science. And you just have to listen to our colleagues' reminder that every decimal place makes an absolutely vast difference to our risk management. And so I think it's right to say that we try to avoid catastrophic outcomes and we keep 1.5 degrees alive. And at the moment, I very much respect John's point that it's incredibly challenging. But at the moment, I would say from a diplomatic point of view, the clarity of the science and the clarity of the goal in general terms is very helpful at pulling everybody to attention. Many countries and many leaders have not sufficiently focused on this. You may think that's remarkable, but it's true. And for them to understand what's at stake is very clear. The thing that stood out from the previous UN report was when they said, at 1.5 degrees, we estimate 70 to 90% of the world's coral is dead. Above 2 degrees, it's all gone. And this is the life of the oceans in the coral. This is where it begins. And these are the sort of consequences we're talking about. So it's very important to be clear about the absolutely extraordinary and unmanaged risks that we're talking about, and that we do everything in our power, especially when it makes sense economically and socially. So to link it to the next question, this momentum, really has been extraordinary. I think it's not so much a concern that maybe some countries will resist this direction, this trend or this pathway. I think that in some cases their focus is elsewhere, and they have good reasons for focusing in other areas. I think the bigger thing that we need to worry about is how quickly countries that have committed to net zero or not committed to net zero, how quickly they are able to put in place the quality and the detail of policy that will get the 2030 number into a better place. Now, 2050, 2060 net zero basically gives you that framework, and then you're just not credible if you then have a 2030 number that still involves emissions going up very steeply, because you said you were going to be neutral by 2050. So what it's doing now, we're really focusing on driving that 2030 number so that we get as close as possible to the 45 degrees reduction. Now, a nice piece of evidence coming from the recent UN 2030 synthesis report was that when a country does put in a new 2030 target, a more ambitious target, it really does bend the curve of temperature. We were on track for approaching 4 degrees Celsius before Paris. We're now on track for something above 2 degrees. So it's not good enough, but you can see that the combination of the net zero commitment and the 2030 more detailed, ambitious commitment does work. So I think that's what I would say is our focus.
I thank you very much, and I was just sort of putting down a word that you've been saying. Now, Carsten, we have a number of countries that are chipping in, a number of countries that are committed anew or recently committed. As I mentioned, Turkey and Australia, but there are a couple of other countries as well. My question is, do we actually need all of them with commitments, or can you envisage that there are countries that don't have, as Nick just said, not the net zero commitment, but that we take along on their pathway, maybe by sharing technology or by finding new technologies like actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere?
I think we opened up for such a possibility because we decided in Paris that we have nationally determined contributions. So it is for a country itself to decide. But it's not that these decisions need to be less ambitious. It is just that they are not pre-negotiated in a fixed set. And by the 80% showing, and I called it the new normal earlier on, that is what the world public expects. So the pressure on the remaining 20% gets bigger. At least they have to argue if they say, I can do my bit better in a different term by, for example, just providing forest sinks for the world. But that is already included in the concept of NDCs. So I'm not fixating on getting 100% at this COP. That is impossible because credible NDCs need a time to be prepared within countries and consensus being built through governments and the public. So therefore, yes, there are different opportunities to do your fair share in solving the climate issue. And for some countries, providing things is even more at the forefront. For others, we need to decarbonize our energy or transport sectors. And but that is inbuilt. But in the end, as Astrid earlier on said, we all need to be climate neutral.
Thank you, Carsten. And Astrid, I'd like to sort of play half of that question in your direction, unless Nick, you want to. Did I just hear a sound? No. Astrid and then Nick. Astrid, we also have a question dedicated to that, but we know that in the IPCC report there's always been a certain percentage that is taking carbon out of the atmosphere. The percentage ought to be higher if we want to achieve relevant results. And this is a question from the University of Trier. Negative emissions are necessary to keep the 1.5 limit. The stop of burning fossil fuels will improve air quality, but will also reduce the cooling by aerosols. What is the strategy to remove these huge amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere?
That is certainly one of the big elephants in the room, let's phrase it that way. I think we do not have the technology at hand at the moment for a large-scale CO2 removal that would add to natural things and remove the CO2 that is needed to be removed. So this is something that certainly will have to be developed, or we really need to make sure that there is a very, very tiny amount of remaining emissions. And that will really change every sector and affect every piece of our life.
Great. Nick, did I interpret that correctly, that you wanted to chip in?
I think it might have been a noise from Carsten, but I would like to say something. No, anyway, very briefly, I have three I's, the letter I, on these issues: investment, innovation, and incentives. Investment, we have to stop talking about the cost of action. It is so much less than the cost of not acting, but it's also, if we do it well, it's an investment in our future and in our economy, in our society. So the investment side is a very attractive investment proposition, this new cleaner economy. Very attractive, historically low interest rates, a lot of liquidity, a lot of sovereign wealth funds, a lot of philanthropy, a lot of government investment looking for a good investment. And we're doing lots to try and accelerate those investments. Innovation, is obvious that we have to tackle the supply side and also the demand side to reduce our needs, reduce our energy needs, and so on, and all kinds of smart systems, big data, and also innovations in the way we live and the way we think about the way we live and what really matters and what we should measure and what we should target as our goals. These things, innovations, are crucial. But the third one, I would be brief because it's what Carsten and I think the minister already said, which is on all of these questions of removals and so on, it's incentives. If we price pollution and we price greenhouse gases properly, they will move out of the market more quickly, and there will be a market in capturing and utilizing that carbon. And the reason this extraction hasn't happened so far is because it doesn't make economic sense, because we're not supporting clean stuff and we are supporting fossil fuels. And this is a very long-standing question. We're particularly looking to the multilateral development banks and the international financial institutions to help us make big steps on these subsidy questions and give advice to all of their customer countries on this agenda so that we can move to pricing properly and making therefore the shift much more exponential.
Carsten, I've just heard the word pricing and I've heard the word subsidies, and we still have a situation in which most countries, even after this sort of recovery, the green recovery after COVID-19, are still subsidizing brown technologies. So actually, the easiest pathway would be to stop all these subsidies, as has been an argument for the last couple of years. Why is it so difficult to get that step done?
Incumbents are powerful, and so many problems we face today were policy decisions in the past, and certain industries and consumers get addicted to some privileges they got in the past, which are outdated today. And therefore, it needs political courage, and I hope that those who negotiate the new coalition treaty are courageous in phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, the remaining ones in Germany. And by this, I think you get the economics right and build incentives, as Nick said, for investing into other fields. You can also see in some countries in the Middle East that their state budgets are overburdened by paying the subsidies, in particular when oil prices are not that high. And it's you come close to bankrupt in certain economies. So it is a politically wise decision to take these subsidies out who have been established in the past. But it's not easy. We are calling for this in statements of leaders for quite some time. And for me, it's up that we follow up through concrete advice and measuring. And therefore, in many countries who have not decided to do so, and it's many developing countries, the World Bank and the IMF play a critical role. In Europe, the discussion we have on the so-called taxonomy, green taxonomy for new investment becomes pretty critical, because it's one thing to rectify mistakes of the past, but I think it's our obligation now to make sure that we don't invest into wrong projects for the future. And therefore, we need to specify the details of the European taxonomy and stand strong against pressure of getting fossil fuel included.
Henrich, if and as your policy has been successful, what do you expect in the next 5 years to happen?
You're talking about climate policy or foreign policy?
Both. your special area, which combines both.
Let me first say a word, if you allow, on the COP and what Nick just said. And it must be terrible for you as a moderator to have 4 speakers who basically agree on everything. Well, but there's one thing I'd like to stress here, and this is about the COP and the reception of the COP. We have seen in the past that journalists tend to cover a COP conference with a perspective of either breakthrough or failure. Mm-hmm. There seems to be nothing in between. And I would argue for the fact that there are at least 500 shades of gray. And it's not only about breakthrough or failure, it's about making progress. The more progress we make, the better. And therefore, to all the journalists attending here, please take a differentiated, sophisticated look at the outcomes of the COP, and therefore also welcome the broad participations by civil society, by other actors, because it diversifies the picture coming out of Glasgow and tells us how important and how basically covering all aspects of life, climate change and climate protection is. Okay, to say to your question, what would it mean if our policies in terms of making sure that countries understand the need to look at climate change as a threat multiplier, what would it result in? I would say it would result in a different approach, for example, to humanitarian assistance, to conflict resolution mechanisms, because we would understand that underlying causes of humanitarian disasters or of conflicts would stem from climate change. And we could also imagine that by intervening in such situations, we would factor in let's say, resource management, access to resources, warming, droughts, to a much higher degree than we do today. And we would love to see, let's say, the Security Council and other bodies dealing with foreign and security policy challenges being much better informed about the contextual factors that contribute to such conflicts and issues, be it climate change, be it water scarcity, and so on. Because this, in the end, will help us to be better in terms of preventive diplomacy and to become better in conflict resolution. So that's the ideal world.
Well, thank you very much for that, and also for sort of hitting out at journalists, which I was. I was working for a program that actually had the chance for actually people to finish a sentence rather than just have one sentence. But that's a completely different issue. Now you're going to have that reporting in Glasgow. You have a lot of newspapers and TV stations giving climate issues a much higher credence today. So maybe Nick, a number of questions to be quickly answered. Some of the delegates from Africa apparently still do not have a visa. Is this to be solved in time? The next thing would be the question from somebody who is already in Glasgow after the pandemic. What do you expect? How will the ambience be? I mean, again, 25,000 people, and I believe that you have this incredible check and balances. Everybody has to show that they have been injected, and there's also a financial backup for those who might have to isolate themselves. So what do you think is going to happen when science, civil societies and NGOs are hitting the road again and 25,000 people are going to be in Glasgow?
Yeah, no, it's all quite easy and straightforward. No problem. No, I mean, biggest ever gathering of world leaders, certainly in Britain. Tens of thousands of people in a period of COVID, where she's still desperately serious and difficult in many places. So yes, we've had to make a decision about doing it in person, because there's not really, once we delayed correctly, we then had to get together because this issue is so vital. And so, yes, we're just doing everything we can. Our whole diplomatic network has been working for over a year to lay the foundations of success and just manage the risks as best we can. We've got a huge operation to provide visas, but countries also have to make their own plans in time, and we can't help it if somebody waits till the day before to try and organize. So we're doing everything we can to get everybody there and provide the information that everybody needs. I've been speaking to every ambassador in the British diplomatic system every week or two for months. We've been working all of our systems with our Italian colleagues in particular to make this safe and inclusive as possible. But it's clearly a huge endeavor. And then there will be all the kind of protocols and testing and respect for each other that we need. Because, I mean, I come back to where I started, which is that we have to, deliver an inclusive and genuinely inclusive COP. And, we can see that in the world, the challenges we face, just look at the vaccination rollouts. They're all quite different. Look at the resources countries have to get to COP. So we're trying to help with that. It's all quite different. And so that's at the top of our minds. I do appreciate what Heinrich said also about the narrative and the journalists' contribution. It's so, I think, accurate what Heinrich said, which is this narrative of complete failure, complete success is not helpful. It's not really grounded in an understanding or a thoughtful sense of the proceedings. We will make huge progress. We won't solve everything. And it's really, I think, the responsibility. It's a responsibility to everybody to have the knowledge and deeply think through the messages they're sending, because we have to try and have solidarity and trust on this. Of course, we call out failings and weaknesses, of course, but we have to try and find the right balance and an accurate sense of what's actually going on. And the writers, many of whom are fantastic, will often, if things do go a bit odd, will then say, well, it was the sub-editor who wrote the headline, which was, So we've all got a responsibility, I think, to just think about, this is such a great challenge, practically, in safety and in policy. And we just ask for everybody's help and support, because we really need to do this to the best of our abilities. Thank you.
Astrid, on the government track, of course, scientists are not sitting at the same table in Glasgow. But what do you expect from a scientific point of view? What do you expect, and maybe what do you hope for in a nutshell?
Well, as I mentioned before, I would hope that the planning, how do we get to climate neutrality, gets more concrete. We see more clearly where we are heading and how we are going to achieve that. And it has to be emphasized that really now is the time to act. It also means if we act now and if we do go straight forward for real drastic emission reductions, that in only something like 15 years, the temperature trends are going to differ compared to a scenario where we do not act. And so this is really the time to take bold actions and move forward.
If I may just sort of comment and leave my moderator's hat for a second, it seems that the sense of urgency has become much more widespread, and the awareness seems to be more widespread, and Hinrich also amongst journalists. So this was probably the last word. Carsten, maybe sort of one sentence. I don't know how many COP it's going to be for you, but maybe sort of one sentence of expectations.
Turning the world onto a path that keeps 1.5 in reach, and it's about ambition, solidarity, and cooperation.
That's lovely. Nick, we wish you a lot of energy for the next couple of weeks. I think you've already worked really hard in the last year, so keep up that energy. And for all of us, we hope that, there was one catching of breath and one last sentence from you. Nick?
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you to everybody in the German system for putting this event on, but for all of the collaboration in the last few months. It's been very humbling, and we appreciate it, and let's go for it in the next few weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nick Bridge, UK Special Representative for Climate Change, and of course also to Carsten Zach, to Astrid Kiendler-Scharr, who's both enlightened us with the headlines probably of the IPCC report, and also gone a bit more into depth, and Hinrich Tölken for sharing the place that we're in, i.e. the Foreign Office's view on the aspect, and also the security aspect. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think Nick Bridge said at the beginning that it's not just political anymore, COP26, but that society and economy are in it as well. And this is exactly what we're going to do in the second part of our discussion this afternoon in the climate briefing. We're going to talk to a representative of one of the important aspects that we need. We need corporations to chip in, and some corporations are running faster than others. We're going to have a representative here. We're having the new phenomenon of citizens' council, of citizens' assemblies talking about climate change, enlightening each other and thereby people around. We, of course, have not just climate science, but we also have economists looking at our economic system and seeing what needs to be changed, what needs to be triggered in order to get the economic results and the monies into the right place. We're going to have an answer here. And of course, we have always the watchdogs and those putting together the studies of which you were talking about. So, ladies and gentlemen, after the break, i.e. at 10 to 4, we're going to be back. We hope that you grab your coffee, maybe little coffee, because of course the footprint of coffee is also really bad. Tea, water is best, or whatever you need to do, as long as you're back by 10 to 4. See you. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. 20 minutes of break. We hope that you did have a breather. I'm not quite sure the climate has had a breather in that shorter time. And of course, we are still in the climate briefing for the COP26. Now, there's a beautiful quote from the US Special Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, that he mentioned a couple of weeks ago in Milan. It costs more not to respond to the climate crisis than it costs to respond. And of course, that is a saying that goes back to the Nick Stern report that we've had almost 15 years ago. And these things haven't really changed. What has changed, and we've heard all about the political impetus that's going to be the framework for the COP26. And we've also heard about the fact that on the to-do list is finishing the Paris rulebook, and the second one is to tackle the climate crisis through a collaboration between governments, business and civil society. And we're now in the second part of our climate briefing before the COP26, looking at these two aspects. We're looking at business, we're looking at civil society, and of course, everybody else who is involved. And let's look at industry first. There are a number of organizations, of businesses, of industries that are already chipping in, that they're doing much more. And if you do remember that we've just had a panel discussion earlier saying, oh, well, yes, you know, journalistic reporting ought to be a bit more positive. Well, if you look at the Financial Times, for example, you can actually see that their climate reporting and reporting on climate action of big companies has increased tremendously in the last couple of years. There are, however, a couple of industries that are difficult to turn around really, really quickly. That's aviation, that's steel, that's shipping. They belong to the hardest to abate industries. And of course, there is also the chemical industry. So we're now really, really happy to have here, live and in color, in a beautiful blue, Dr. Melanie Maas-Brunner. She's the member of the board of executive directors at BASF. Please share with us the pathway that BASF has taken in the last couple of years and is looking forward to for the future. Dr. Melanie Maas-Brunner, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Conny. It's really a pleasure to be here, ladies and gentlemen, and giving here insights from the industry, from the chemical industry. And I hope after my short presentation, you will be convinced that also the chemical industry is part of the solution and not part as a problem for climate change. And we heard already a lot in the first panel session that really society is facing a major transformation. And you heard also that all of us are committed to operating in a climate neutral and also a closed loop manner. And this means that we also have fundamentally to change the way we are living and working. And I will talk about this from the perspective of the chemical industry, specifically from the perspective of BASF as a big corporate company. And let's start with our targets. And I think every journey needs to start with a target. And you might have seen this, not only us, several other companies have clear targets towards climate neutrality in the year 2050. We would like to be net zero, but we have also put the year 2030 as a specific target because we want to be as concrete as possible in implementing measures towards this time period. And this is so important because the investment cycle in the chemical industry takes some time. If you start with a new technology and you make it then workable, it's at least, let's say, 5 to 10 years more in the 10 years time frame. So therefore, this target is so important. We would like to reduce our CO2 emission by then, compared to the year 2018, by 25%. And because this is the year of our new BASF strategy. If you would compare this to the year 1990, which is used as a reference year for many, many purposes, we would reduce our CO2 emissions by 60%. And you have to keep in mind, in the same time frame, we doubled our production output. So what we achieved already, and you see we are already working on cutting our emissions really significantly. So we haven't slept for a couple of years. We are working on this already for decades. But I think this transformation today is a bit different because what we did in the past was really optimizing our technologies. Now we have to think in terms of new technologies. We have to be very creative in really changing this. And I would like to show you some of the technologies. And I think also here, and I start with this, all those technologies need lots of renewable energy. And this will be also later on my take-home message for you. So what we have implemented is the so-called carbon management program. And this all starts with transparency. What we did already in the beginning of, let's say, the first decade of 2000, creating this transparency in terms of where is CO2 coming from, where are the emissions coming from. And we have fine-tuned this over time, and we have now a very clear view. We have emitting 22 million tons CO2 yearly. This is really a big, big figure. And this is coming half from the energy we are using for chemistry production, and it's half coming from the production, really the way we are synthesizing our chemicals and the molecules. And it's so important to have this transparency because with this you have also a good starting point in knowing where the right measures have to be implemented. And with this, I think it's not only that we have it now on this very holistic view looking from the top on this BASF global company, we have this also in this transparency for all our 45,000 products we are producing. We have the so-called product carbon footprint, which is then really allocating the CO2 to the specific molecule a customer is buying from us. And this is also not including only the scope 1 and scope 2, but it's also including scope 3 emissions with this. So, and with this we also know where to change. I think the first important thing is in this, what you see here on the slide with these green clusters. I think when we talk about our energy demand, it's very easy to change this. We have to change gray energy into green electricity. This sounds easy, but in principle it's obviously not that easy because we have to make this renewable energy coming to our plants. So we have to make it being produced. We have to think about solar, about offshore wind, and we have to also think about the grids, the infrastructure, bringing it really to our different production sites. When we talk to power to steam, we talk about the steam we need to really heating up the chemical synthesis, because chemistry, you know this from school, sure, needs a lot of energy to make it happen. And this can be done by implementing, for instance, heat pumps. Heat pumps are well known for low pressure and medium pressure purposes. But if you really want to have high energy steam, you need to think about a completely different technology. And that's something we are launching together with Siemens Energy, and we have started a pilot that we would like to implement as soon as possible at our big Ludwigshafen site. If you look then further to the right side of the slide, you see our upstream. This is really the processes we are doing, starting from steam cracking, for instance. And the upstream part is producing, in the chemical world, most of the chemical-produced CO2. In the downstream side, it looks a bit different. Here, it's less along the value chains. And here you can also think about solutions like bringing in, instead of fossil fuels, bringing in renewable, bio-based raw materials. And this is quite easy because here a big watch out, and I need to remind you, if you talk about bio-based raw materials for our production, you talk also about the land use. So we have to be clearly very careful in how we make this bio raw materials available for chemical synthesis here, not competing with the land that we need to use to feed the world energy, the world population. Sorry about that. So if you now dig a little bit more into the details, in chemical industry, there are basically a couple of technologies only that are emitting lots of CO2. And this is most of all the steam cracker. This is the part where we basically use our raw materials, the fossil raw materials, crack it into small parts, into components that we then can use in our synthesis in the chemical, along the chemical value chains. And then there's hydrogen. Hydrogen, for instance, is used for ammonia. This is the second big emitter of CO2. What we do now with the cracker, it's usually heated up to a very, very high temperature by fossil fuels. We use now in a pilot project electricity for heating it up, like kind of heat coils in it. But also here, I'm talking again about electricity. And you see there is really a significant need if you would like to change this from making it happen with fossil and changing it into electricity. So, and what you see here is, if you now would take into account all the electricity we need in the chemical industry to make our production green, less CO2 emissions, we would need at a certain point in time as much energy in the chemical industry as Germany is using right now. So this is really a significant figure. And we have to make sure that this renewable energy is really being produced and it also comes at a certain cost to our sites. And the certain cost means it needs to be cost competitive. And the beauty is that green power is actually quite cheap. There is no variable cost. Wind is there, wind is blowing, wind is not costly. The investment, of course, for an offshore wind park, but the variable costs are basically zero. So, but what we see now is with the taxes and the levies we have on top of this green electricity, that the prices are so high that it would control the behavior, how we can implement new technologies in the wrong direction. So that means we would really need to get rid of all the adders to the electricity price to make really a level playing field for us here in the chemical industry. And what we do as BASF company, we are also investing in this wind park. We have a joint venture with the company Vattenfall in the North Sea. This is a big wind park. It's, I think, will be the largest one for the time being, 1.5 gigawatt. It will go on stream already next year. I think the only thing is we can't bring the electricity for the time being in a cost-competitive way to our Ludwigshafen site, so we will use it in Belgium, where we also have a production. So I haven't talked about another thing. This is the hydrogen component of the transformation. Hydrogen is an essential molecule for the chemical industry. It's not about the energy, it's about really the raw material for the synthesis of chemical products. And we are producing around about 1 million tons of hydrogen every year. And hydrogen is very CO2 intensive. For 1 ton, you are emitting 10 tons of CO2. So all the ways in reducing this and finding new technologies are really, really helpful. And there's basically, I think what I see, 2 main technologies. It's first of all, the well-known water electrolysis. Here we have a known technology. We will implement this also based on an IPCC funding quite soon. The only problem is it also needs lots of energy. Therefore, we are also having a different route in our minds. That's the so-called methane pyrolysis, where we made out of methane carbon and hydrogen, and the energy consumption here is 80% less than in the water electrolysis case. So it's really significant. And it's also CO2-free. We would like to implement this. We have a pilot plant running already before the end of the decade. So now come to the end of my presentation. I think what I try to share with you is that the chemical industry, BASF, is well prepared for the transformation we are facing. So we are committed to low emissions and also to the circular economy. I haven't talked about this yet now. But what we need is, first of all, the green energy. We need the right political framework. And we need also to make this energy cost competitive to not slow down the whole transformation. And we need also the right infrastructure in place, and obviously also support programs that are supporting innovations and new technology. And we need also an openness for new technologies here. So with this, I think we are fully committed and we will make it happen. And it will be also acceptable for society. But we shouldn't wait. We need to start now, and I hope you have seen that we are ready for that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Melanie, and also thank you for almost sticking to time. That was absolutely perfect. And again, if we had people here in the room, I'm quite sure we would hear some applause. But with that, could I just ask you to join the panelists that are already sitting there? And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are outside and watching us, we have a quick change of people. And I'm happy to now bring into the conversation a completely different cup of tea, a completely different player or representative of different players. And with that, I'd like to bring Rabea Kos over to my side. And Rabea, you're the spokesperson of the German Citizens Climate Council, and we didn't quite get to talk about climate councils as a new phenomenon of civil society when we were in the first round, because right at the moment there are about 150 global citizens that are putting together some ideas and they will share them with the COP Presidency in Glasgow very briefly. Now, Germany has undergone such a process. We've probably known, or everybody who's watching us now, they have probably seen that France had a Citizens' Council for climate questions, and you've had your report, and I see you brought it with us, so maybe you just could share it with us. Now, let me just, in order to get us started, let me specify, you were not one of the people that was actually the citizens. You were from right at the beginning elected as a spokesperson, but you guided the process. Now let's start. First of all, why have a Citizens' Council in the first place?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good question. And no, I'm not part of the citizens that were selected, but I'm the spokesperson from the group of organizations that was behind the Citizens' Assembly. And why to have a Citizens' Assembly on the topic of climate change? The phenomenon, as you said, is quite recent. Citizens' Assemblies we saw in Ireland, a very popular one a few years ago, on the topic of abortion. And it was installed to kind of discuss controversial topics within the population, to help policymakers make an informed decision and to understand what the population actually thinks about a certain topic. In France, for example, it was done right after the Yellow Vests protests.
The Gilets jaunes, yeah.
Exactly, installed by President Macron to do the same thing, to get a discussion going between the citizens and the policymakers and develop a set of recommendations for the French government. And in Germany, we now had the Climate Assembly just before the elections to help policymakers during the campaign and now for the new government as well to understand what do the people actually want? What are they willing to take? What are they willing to pay? Which path can we go together?
We've been talking about the role of the press, and the press always says poor this and that part of society, they can't take it, they can't pay anymore. What about transformation? There will be losers, and of course, what do we concentrate on are the losers. So how was the atmosphere at your meetings?
Yeah, so first of all, how the citizens come together is they are selected at random. So they come from all areas in Germany, all regions, different age groups, and it's people who would normally never meet. And that's the great thing about those kind of assemblies, because you get people to discuss and find compromises. And so,
and also people that are not experts on climate issues.
Exactly. Of course, most people have heard about climate change, but they most likely have never thought about what would I recommend. If I was in charge, what would I do? And this is the exact situation that we're creating, which also helps to educate the population and the citizens, not only in the assembly, but also, of course, through press, the general public, to understand what are the measurements that we need to take, what is the transformation, what does it actually mean for me, how much does it cost, and yeah, that's...
How much were politicians involved? You tried to come up with results before the elections so that sort of a next government could be guided by the outcomes?
Exactly. Yeah, we were very lucky to have former President Horst Köhler as a patron to the Citizens' Assembly. That was great, both for the citizens and for the policymakers. And then we had upfront input from all parties represented in the German Bundestag to hear what would they like to understand and know from the citizens. And then we had all climate representatives from the parties involved to discuss with the public as well.
Maybe it was even easier because we've all gotten used to working and communicating digitally, so most of the meetings were digital. Exactly. What was the actual outcome, and was there any surprise in it?
Yeah. there were a lot of recommendations and there were many surprises. Like, first of all, we expected heated debate during the assembly. And of course there was debate, but not necessarily in the areas that we expected. For instance, looking at the sector of food and agriculture, people were actually quite clear that we need to, for example, reduce meat production by 50%. We need to pay higher prices for products that have a high CO2 footprint. That was quite a surprise. We expected to have different outcomes there. And in general, people were quite, so how it works, the recommendations are being voted on at the end. The citizens write their recommendations, and then at the end 160 people actually vote what is being put in this little book. And
not that little, but
yeah, it's actually over 80 recommendations in the end that the citizens came up with. I recommend reading it for anyone. It's really interesting to see. And we only had a few debates in the sector of transportation. Similar to what we had now in the public debate as well. Speed limit was a big topic. Do citizens actually want that or not? It was in the end adopted, but with a minor majority. And the city toll was the only recommendation that was not accepted by the citizens. So it shows that there's still some uncertainty of what to expect. How will I, as a citizen, pay for transportation, for parking in the city?
The system and the process, of course, is approximating the idea that one does have a say in it, and that's a good idea. You mentioned the word that people got educated, but therefore also felt empowered. What does that do with maybe therefore looking at policies done by governments in a different way?
Yeah, I think it helps immensely to both educate and empower people and citizens to be and feel involved, because as we all know, the climate crisis is a huge challenge for everyone, and we're talking about it in economy, in policy, in the civil society, but to actually go into a dialogue with citizens and to develop ideas and suggestions is crucial, because there is a huge transformation coming, and if we don't involve and educate the citizens at the right moment, which is now at the latest, then we leave them behind at some point.
You said it was a semi-democratic process, but on the other hand, of course, you had people that were willing. I mean, they were asked, but then they were also willing to undergo. So maybe it was, let's say, a democratic and still a special audience, not completely different from the average of society, but at least sort of with an open mind to actually undergo that process. The one thing that you really were astonished about, what was that? Could you share that with us, and how can that help us with the transformation process that we're undergoing now?
I think, so first of all, the citizens, yes, they had to be interested in the topic, but we made sure to also involve people. Like, it was not 160 climate activists. We also asked in the beginning, what are your interests? Have you looked at climate change before? And made sure that those are represented. What impressed me the most is the short term in which the citizens really fully got into the topic and became experts on their own, and found compromises the whole time. Like, it's not easy. You live in the city, you live on the countryside, to agree on means of transportations for the future, but they actually did. So this was really impressive, and I think it shows how much we can actually demand from the citizens, and to not think that they are not actually willing to be involved.
So the empowered citizen will also take the right decisions, even if it's hard?
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. It is such a difficult path ahead, and I think it gives hope to see that the citizens come up with such progressive suggestions for the future and for tackling the climate crisis.
Rabea, it was a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for sharing. And there is hope, because there are many, many councils being founded right now in many, many different cities in Germany.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Good work. Thank you so much for having come here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go into the panel discussion. Let me remind you that you have a say, because you can put your questions into the box at the bottom of the stream, and you can actually discuss with us, despite the fact that we have probably enough fodder to talk for the next 50 minutes with these fantastic people that are already here on the panel. And let me start from your point of view on the right-hand side. We have Professor Karen Pittel, normally at home in Munich, but also with half a foot here in Berlin. Munich director of the IFO Center for Energy, Climate and Resources, advising a lot of people, putting out a number of studies, also advising the government, certainly the past, probably also the future. And you're also the co-chair of the German Advisory Council on Global Change, which is rather big. And if I remember correctly, you were also in the Advisory Council of the Citizens Council.
Yes, there was a scientific advisory council that did not try to influence, but to comment.
Great. The person next to you is Dr. Patrick Greichen. He is the executive director of Agora Energiewende, somebody whose heart and whose soul has been in the issue for the last, I said the word veteran earlier, so I'm not going to say that, last 20 years at least, and being involved with Agora Energiewende now for the last 10 years, putting out studies, advising, and being generally an important factor and influence when people are looking, where should we go? And we are invited you because you also did a study this summer that we're going to start off with. Last but not least, and of course, you know Melanie maas-brunner, who has already brought us into the game of how BASF is going to tackle the next couple of years. And Henna Ascher is coming to us and has come to us. He's the deputy head of the Central Market Division at the Deutsche Bundesbank. And we know that the Bundesbank has been actually one of the central banks pushing for green finance for many years now, putting together an assembly of central banks, and we want to know a lot about the financing of everything. And if I now look at this the other gentleman, Dr. Patrick Greichen, one of the studies you did at Agora Energiewende was actually together with industry. Now, as a watchdog, it's quite astonishing that you work with industry, but maybe you explain that in a moment. Secondly, you've looked at what the industry, and I sometimes have the impression, certainly reading the Financial Times, that some industrial players are way ahead of what governments think, just as much as we heard Rabea saying that citizens are ahead of what governments think. So what was your takeaway this summer? What does industry need?
Well, first of all, the good news is BASF, but also others are now on their way to climate neutrality. They've fully accepted the challenge that by 2045 in Germany, 2050 at the latest in all of Europe, production needs to be net zero. And net zero means no emissions in Germany, not buying offsets anywhere in the world. And it's more or less the same story for all of those industries. When they look at their portfolio, they realize we need lots of green electricity, lots and lots of green electricity. Maybe not the 600 terawatt hours that BASF has put on the table, because that was already including all the production needs for the green hydrogen. But still, we calculated for Germany, the power demand will increase by 60% by 2045. And of course, that means quadrupling renewables. So that's the first big main message, and we need that cheap. So industry says we need 4 to 5 cents per kilowatt hours as the price that we can afford to be on a global market in terms of our electricity prices. So that's the main big thing, and that's where the past years in Germany, to be honest, we're not living up to those standards at all. So we need, as the new government needs to really speed up the deployment of renewables, tripling that within the next 3 to 4 years. The second key element is then always, so what is the role of green hydrogen? What is the role of biomass? And how does one use that within the production processes? And how do we get those green molecules to Germany? So we're talking about establishing new pipelines for hydrogen that probably come from the coast down the Rhine to Baden-Württemberg, Bavaria, also in northern Germany. And that will be infrastructure which the government will have to somehow build in the beginning. I mean, if you look at infrastructures in the past, the first grids on electricity and gas, they were all public tasks in the beginning. So that's an effort where we need a type of Wirtschaftswunder thinking to establish the infrastructure that we need. And then the final element is around biomass, is around CCS. That's where we're going to have tough discussions, no doubt about that. Me personally, I think we'll need it, but we'll need to minimize it. So we need to show that this is only the very last step after we are through with electrification, after we're through with green hydrogen, and then the very last bit will be biomass and CCS for those emissions that we can't delete otherwise.
Thank you very much. As a kickoff, and that leads me to talk to Professor Pittel-Karen. Sometimes I have the impression that the consequences from all these shifts that we demand mean we need to completely restructure our economic system. And of course, had it not been for a number of economists saying that we need to price in that which we, under normal circumstances, don't price in, i.e. make a carbon price, and therefore bring carbon into the economic system, which we had forgotten about before, we wouldn't be where we are today. But of course, the list of things that need to change is long. Elucidate us. Where are the main turning points? Where do we need to look and what needs to change?
I mean, first of all, the question whether the economic system needs to change. I mean, that's usually a question of what is constituting the economic system. If you say that, for example, the economic system needs to move away from a market economy towards something else, I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that's wise, because markets can be a problem, but they can also develop a huge potential, huge power in moving things along, but they need the right incentives and the right guidelines if you want to. So new economic system, in a sense that you need to add new elements. You need to add, first of all, I mean, you already said it, a meaningful CO2 price, not something that's at the border somewhere, but something that really sets incentives to get out of the fossil fuels, and not only to get into the renewables, but get out at the same time. So this is like an overarching thing that we need. But then we need a lot of other things as well. Infrastructure. You just said it. I mean, markets will probably provide the infrastructure, but it takes time, and we don't have that time. So it's a matter of finding, if possible, private-public partnerships in order to do that. Then you need support for expansion of renewables. It won't happen fast enough if you just wait for it. I mean, that's always something we have to consider. Many things might evolve over time, but we need to have them really fast at the moment. We need to basically also incentivize energy efficiency. So on the one hand, we want energy to be cheap, to actually, or especially electricity, to get it into transport, to get it into heating as well. At the same time, it couldn't be too cheap, because otherwise we'll just waste it. We need to build up international markets for hydrogen, for example. We need to basically find the supply of green hydrogen. We also have to build up the demand for green hydrogen. So transforming the steel industry, transforming the chemical industry, that needs certain incentives, certain security about what is going to happen. At the same time, we can't do it all unilaterally, so we need to think about international markets, we need to get others on board, climate diplomacy. I mean, that's what the COP is really important for, the G20 meetings are really important for, but then also we need to keep people on board. So we also have to think about social justice, about social acceptability, as we just heard. I mean, this is all great in theory, and economists are always really good at pointing out what needs to be done in theory. But in order to get it really done, we need the political support. We're living in a democracy, and we want to live in a democracy, and that means that we have to listen as well to what's coming from the population and have to integrate it. And citizen councils is one way, but you need to make sure that the voice is not only heard for a second, but that there is some structured way in which this is kind of carried on into politics. So there's a lot of things that we have to do.
I think we can go into detail throughout the next 35 minutes, and we could probably talk for 35 minutes on that. And so
I forgot the finance industry,
exactly,
but we're getting there.
Exactly. Somebody's got to give the finance, somebody's got to give the money, and we heard that, of course, at COP26, the transmission of bringing, or the big word is shifting the trillions, of course, but that includes the private sector. I mean, first of all, the 100 billion that we want in order to take along developing countries. But Mr. Asche, Henna, the Deutsche Bundesbank has already embarked on a, inverted commas, green policy for a number of years. What is at the core, and how can you take commercial banks along?
Okay, yes, thank you very much for that question. And let me bring in what the role of central banks is in this game. And here I would first refer to your presentation, your excellent presentation. You not only make sure that we are confronted with unprecedented uncertainty, but also with unprecedented transformation. And you made clear that transformation is possible. And this is a very important lesson. And also that it can be done without comprising growth and welfare at the end. So what is the role of central banks in this game? So please let me recall what Mark Carney said in 2015 with his famous Tragedy of Horizon speech. There he said, once climate change becomes a defining issue for financial stability, it may already be too late. And Andrew Bailey, the current governor of the Bank of England, he added to this month by saying the economic risk of climate change are not so far over the horizon. So here we are. So in the fight against climate change, all economic agents have to act, and transformation is the only and the best safeguard. But transformation is not possible without investment. And we already know these tremendous volumes of investments calculated by many, many organizations that are needed. And the issue for investment then is financing. And challenging the financing to the necessary transformation is precisely where we need for a stable and resilient financial sector, stable and resilient banks and other players in the market. And this is exactly one reason why the central banks came into the game, and why we not stand at the sidelines. We are part of the game, and we are often, obviously the transformation affects our financial stability mandate. That's what we have in our mandate, to preserve financial stability. And by contributing to this financial stability in the system, central banks can then help companies, can then help private households to make the necessary long-term investments for the transformation of our economies. And here I can also refer to what the COP26 chair put into his concept when he said central banks and regulators need to make sure that our financial systems can withstand the impact of climate change and support then the transition to net zero.
A bit more concretely,
Yes.
Let's talk about, like, for example, the cooperation between the Ministry of Finance, who this year issued, or last year issued green bonds, and they were gone within seconds. So out there is a certain demand, and quite obviously there is a lot of thinking going on at the Bundesbank in the right direction. How do you become that transmission mechanism that we need?
What we now really do is to bring awareness to the financial system, that we ask them to put climate risk-related issues into their own risk management, because they have to know whether they have stranded assets on their balance sheets now or in the near future. This is something we want to see, and we also want to see it and to bring it to us. For example, when it comes to monetary policy operations, that's our main business. Giving credit to institutions, we need collaterals. And now we have decided that in the future we will make as one eligibility criterion requirement that they show up what their risks are, that they disclose what they have in these assets they bring to us. And if we buy bonds, we have large buying asset purchase programs running, we will also ask them from the issuers, what is in your asset and climate risk? And that's the way where we try to work as a catalyst to bring more transparency into the market, which helps then to prevent mispricing of the risk. As long as we don't know the risk, we cannot be sure that we have the right prices in there. And this is a very important role we play. And you mentioned the assets, the Green Bund. Yes, there are a number of sovereigns now around the world who issue green bonds or social bonds from the EU, we have learned, or sustainability bonds. So there's a lot of activity around from the public sector also. And you already mentioned there's a huge demand for it. It's always oversubscribed, these issuances. So what we learn from this, that there is enough money around who would like to invest more sustainable. I guess the bottleneck is not, at least in the northern hemisphere, is not a lack of money, it's a lack of projects. It's a lack of speed to bring an idea into a product, into a new production line. This is where we have to work on more, but that's not a central bank business. That is what we do when we are asked for some advice from the ministries.
Thank you, Hannah, for that. At a recent conference, an OECD observer and analyst said sometimes not yours, but multilateral development banks are suffering from the fact that there are too many old heads without the right ideas and the right attitude to bring about that change that we need. Now, Melanie, sometimes, I mean, certainly, as I said, reading the Financial Times, all these big companies claim they want to get to net zero by 2040, 2045, 2050. You've just taken us along. One has the impression that companies are actually extremely willing, and then there always comes the little but. Where does the willingness come from, and where does the but come in?
I think clear the willingness comes from our commitment that we really would like to contribute to the climate change, and that we are really meeting those targets. They are our, basically, that's what we want to achieve. And we already, with our measures, it's not only that we have an idea, we also spend significantly money on what we are doing. I think till 2025, only on transforming BASF towards the climate neutrality, we are spending the 1 billion, and till the end of the decade, it's additional 2 to 3 billion. But this is money for extremely expensive and new technologies. So we need to align what we are doing also with the policymakers, so that we cooperate, that what is being implemented, and it was said before, we need the infrastructure being in place. So this needs to be all aligned. And we also heard before that we need to have the right CO2 pricing. And I fully agree with this. But that needs to be not only discussed in Europe, in Germany, in Europe, this needs to be discussed also on the global level, because there's chemical industry is a global industry. So, and the CO2 pricing will keep us in a competitive range, or it will leave us behind if we do this in the wrong way. So I think this is something where especially the policymakers and also hopefully also the COP26 will play a significant role in aligning on a global level. And maybe chemical industry is a little bit too much wishful thinking, but at least if G20 or G7 would align on some very specific mechanism, it would really help us.
Thank you very much for that. And maybe when we look at stranded assets, if you're talking about a house that's being built now, you're talking 30, 40 years at least. When we talk about your big Verbundstandorte, we're probably talking to 60, 70, right, even longer. So whatever you're doing now has a high risk and high implication for the future. Patrick, when we look at all of this, and of course we look at industry simply because we have BASF here in the panel, but we're also missing one big part, which is agriculture, food and agriculture. We've had this year, and maybe that's timely for COP26, we've had the big UN Food Systems Summit in New York, which actually highlighted the role and the CO2 imprint of the whole sector that we all need. Of course, you know, we need to eat, yes. So the question is, how much does that play a role within, let's say, the German budget?
Well, when we did the numbers on climate neutral Germany, we basically found out that agriculture, which is so far only a minor sector compared to the others, will be coming more and more relatively in importance, because at the end, the residual emissions from minus 95% to zero will be agriculture. So this is then actually a real challenge, because in industry we do have technologies to help us out. The same as in energy and in housing and in transport. In agriculture, it's basically cattle. It's the animals. That's where most of the emissions come from. Methane,
the emissions come from.
Methane and nitrogen oxide, that's coming basically directly from feedstock.
Yeah, and we've just heard Astrid saying that methane, which we knew. Yeah.
So that's one part where exactly it is about changing habits. It is about less meat consumption. It is about basically moving beyond meat with those Beyond Meat burgers. And so in a way, whereas for the other sectors, I would say this is about getting the technologies we know speedily and scale out there. In agriculture, it is about shifting mindsets and about using our land differently than we're using it now.
Thank you very much. I'm quite sure that sort of everybody who was in New York, sort of their ears will be ringing. Karen, we've heard in the first round, I think one or two speakers mentioning the fact that Europe, of course, tries to go ahead with Fit for 55, etc., and establishing a taxonomy, but what happens when products cross borders? One way round, the other way round. And I see Melanie nodding heftily because, of course, international company with sort of, you know, mainstay in China, in Germany, has to do that daily. So we've created this carbon border adjustment mechanism. Incredibly difficult to somebody who is not an economist, or?
Implementing, yes. I think the general logic behind this is not so difficult. I mean, basically it is that if we have substantial carbon prices in Europe, and they are bound to go up even further for the energy intensive industries, we already are at 50, 60 euros per ton of carbon. Now, if they go up even further, of course, then these products are not necessarily competitive on an international market when others don't pay these prices. So there's two elements to it. On the one hand, these products come into Europe but they don't have to pay that at home. So basically it is about taxing it at the border. So that's the carbon border adjustment mechanism, that you actually import it into Germany and then levy a kind of tax on it. The second part about it, and that's at the moment probably the bigger problem in the long run, is of course the same happens if you export. So you have this tax in Europe, you export to global markets, you don't have anything there. And as this kind of adjustment mechanism is at the moment suggested by the EU for good reasons, because of international trade laws, there is nothing planned for exporting. So you have, basically you try to make products competitive on it internationally with respect to imports. You cannot do that easily with respect to exports. And we have a system at the moment that kind of takes care of that, but you can't prolong that forever with basically decreasing amounts of emissions that are available for the entire economy. So you have to change the system. The question is how. That is the suggestion.
On the international scale, is that helpful on the economic side, just as much as we've heard earlier Hinrich saying that, yes, there's climate diplomacy going on? Is that a way or a means in incentivizing probably other countries that send their products into the EU, maybe to start carbon pricing their products as well?
I mean, that is surely the hope. I mean, we'll see how it goes. Let's put it like that. I mean, we had a kind of a test run, if you want, in the past where Europe introduced emission trading on flights and was aiming to do that beyond the European borders. And there was a big fight, trade fight, basically threatened. I mean, it was kind of averted in the last second. So there's sure to be some pushback initially, but I think the situation is a little bit different now than it was before, in the sense that China has a carbon neutrality target for 260 at the moment. The US has it for 250. And many of those countries, we've heard before how many countries actually have carbon neutrality targets. Many of those haven't really have the instruments and the measures yet. So there might be a different kind of field on which this initiative is falling at the moment. And so it might be pushing countries really into the direction. But the question is then, how do you do it? I mean, do you only accept that other countries are pricing carbon as well? Or how do you account for regulatory standards, for example, that you are not permitted to do certain things? That costs industry as well. But it doesn't show up one-to-one in euros or dollars. So you have to be quite flexible with respect to that. On the other hand, you have to be not too flexible in order not to erode the standards. So it is quite a complicated field, but the hope certainly is that we will not need this kind of instruments in the long run, but rather have other countries kind of jumping on the bandwagon and actually implementing stricter policies.
Thank you very much. No, you do your next tenor, but before that, I would like Melanie to put her nodding into words.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think what you are talking about, finding the right balanced CO2 pricing mechanism worldwide for a certain period of time, till everyone is really fulfilling the commitments in a visible way, it would really help, because then this creates, this would mean that there is really the competitive perspective in the business still existing, so it's not fading away. And with this, I think also how then the money is really wisely spent for the right things would be much easier to be justified. So I like this very much.
It's not all about the money, but money moves a lot of things. Having shared our enthusiasm for, let's say, green finance, how do you actually get it? I mean, as I said, it seems that the Bundesbank seems to be a driving force. How do you get your good ideas and certainly your leadership ideas into the rest of the system? How do you filter it down?
First of all, we have to bring it to the global central bank community. This is our first task we were looking at, because it's a global problem. And that's why we founded this network for greening the financial system in 2017, the second anniversary of the Paris Climate Agreement. We started with 8 countries, with 8 members. The Bundesbank was one of these 8 founding members. Now we have reached nearly 100. And we call ourselves as a coalition of the willing. We are not standard setters, but we all have the same objective or aim in mind. And we are not that much politically driven like other decision-making bodies. And here we come together and really said, okay, what do we want to achieve? Yes, we want to be, so to say, down to earth. We want to find the best practices. We want to write rule books. We want to give guidance and things like that. And that's why, when you look at all our deliverables we have been released so far, they are all really very made for handish business. How supervisors can really supervise climate-related risk. How we can set up a stress test when we stress test the financial system with regard to climate change. We will have a very, very huge stress test in the Euro system next year and one in the Bundesbank, and we will put in carbon prices in different scenarios and see how they what that would mean for the financial sector. And this is, so to say, a coalition that has already made really successful products. When we come to scenario analysis, nobody can predict exactly what's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years, so we have to take recourse to scenarios. Yes? And these scenarios are now very well developed by the NGFS, by this network, now very well accepted by the supervisors and also by the banks, and that are supervised and say, okay, let's take these, let's take as a common tool to check what climate change might do to our balance sheets. You can do it in a static way or in a dynamic way because the financial industry has to adjust. We hope so in the future. And it's quite complicated, but this is something that is really there already.
Grand. Patrick, you want
to... just wanted to follow up on that because basically the next step is then to make that obligatory. Because, I mean, the UK is a leader on that. They've just basically set a standard of not only climate change risk, but also the risk of adapting your company to climate policy. So they've said you need to do shadow pricing internally with your whole portfolio at £450, right, per ton of CO2, which is there as damage costs that they put. We proposed, let's say, what the environmental agency in Germany has said, 195 euros per ton of CO2, and basically tell financial actors and listed companies, we want that you do a risk assessment. What happens to your business case at 195 euros per ton of CO2? And then a lot of people would find out, well, my traditional business case is not going to survive. So better start a trajectory of reforming your company, because otherwise it might be gone the more we approach climate neutrality.
Karen comes in, and even 2 years ago, I had somebody from a heavy industry sitting next to me saying, well, if it's 160 euros for carbon, that's fine if everybody has to produce under the same conditions. And I think that's where the sort of level playing field comes in. Karen, I don't want to stop you from chipping in.
Yeah, I'm just kind of perhaps clarifying. I'm not quite sure whether there's a misunderstanding or not, or with the audience, perhaps, because I think the central banks can play a major role in the sense of getting the process started. But like Patrick just said, the aim is that the private markets are also picking up this risk. So basically that the evaluation of a firm, of a project, etc., is really not only with respect to like pure short-sighted profits, but really taking into account the danger to profits from climate change, but also from climate policy. So I don't think it's really about the central banks making climate policy, but the central banks pushing this kind of risk disclosure, getting the prices for financial assets right. And I think that is a really important process that we observe at the moment. That's the EU taxonomy that is in there, but there's other German international global initiatives that have to be kind of coordinated a little bit better perhaps in the future. But there's a lot out there, and that's not just because climate activists want it, but because it's really best for business as well. And I think this is something that needs to be clarified sometimes.
I have one problem. I want to ask about 10 different questions, and I think we only have 11 more minutes. There is one question, Karen, that is left for you in a moment, which is the one, the transfer mechanism. We've been talking about macro, we're talking about countries, but of course, the one big fear, and I'm not quite sure, Rabea, that's why I'm looking over there, Rabea is still in this room, is of course what happens to me as a person. Can I survive a transfer or a new system? If I have to pay higher prices, will I get money back? So that's for you the question. I'm quite sure, Patrick, you actually addressed the question of how far citizens are involved in this transfer time that we live in, and also, forgive me, but of course BASF is a big wig, and they can steer a lot of things and they can actually do a lot of things on their own, but what about the small and medium-sized companies in Germany? And for you, Melanie, and let's start with you, what is your actual wish as this big player, this influential player? You're not actually going to go to COP. One of the few companies, I think there were 10, 20 companies that sort of chipped in and got criticized for it in Glasgow. But what's your wish for Glasgow? And also, well, we are going to have a new government here. Never mind who it is, but what is necessary for you to continue on your pathway?
Yeah. I think for the COP26, it's quite clear. It's all about this level playing field that you mentioned. I think the mechanisms need to ensure that what we do, starting in Europe, is really spreading around the globe and making things really manageable for the big companies like us. Because all the big companies are global companies, and we will talk about the smaller companies later on. Maybe they have a different view on that. And I think this is really the right thing to do. It's about the CO2 pricing topic, and for the politicians in Germany specifically. I think I see now a little bit light at the end of the tunnel, that things are now moving. Because I think we heard a lot. There's also here on the side of the politicians, there's huge commitment, but what's a little bit missing is the action. And we had the discussion also before. The action has to start. And I see also what's now being discussed also with the new government, most likely, when we talk about the pricing, the EEG. I think there is now also the chance that this is fading away. And this would be a very supportive incentive for the heavy industry. And also what you mentioned, the infrastructure. I think there needs to be a commitment that infrastructure is in some way started to think about who's really going to pay for this and what's the speed in implementing this. Because if speed of the industry and speed of the politicians is not aligned, I think we will surely miss the target. And that's, I think no one here on stage would like to see this.
Thank you, Patrick, with lots of chips on your shoulders, but that way you can sit up straight. So citizens and small and medium-sized companies.
Maybe start with the small and medium-sized companies. What they really need is certainty in terms of where to invest. And for that, we need the prices to be right. So we know electrification is a key element of any decarbonization strategy. So electricity should be cheaper at least than oil and gas, which is the alternative for any new application. So the job of the government is really to give clear guidance where the direction will be: efficiency, renewables, electrification, and then hydrogen, and then for them to find their strategy within that broad picture. And the second element, it will be make the investment in the clean cheaper than the investment in the fossil-based one. So that whenever they do the numbers, this is not about doing any trade-offs, but it's very clear my next new investment is going to be in one of those green strategies. So I think they don't have those big strategy departments which can do the numbers for them. So it has to be very clear from the outset what is the right way forward. When it comes to citizen, well, the discussion is always how am I affected? Which kind of prices do I have to pay? Or how will it change my everyday life? And there, I mean, I think we have a good story in the terms that you can still live in warm houses, but the heating is going to be heat pumps and not gas boilers anymore. You can still drive around in your car, but it's going to an electric car and not internal combustion anymore. So it's rather the question of, so how does that transfer take place? And again, here, how do we make the clean alternative to be also the economic viable alternative whenever new investment decisions are taken? So whenever a new boiler has to be put into the house or whenever a new car is bought.
Yeah.
So that's the type of thinking where the government needs to basically make the green the cheap alternative by introducing carbon taxes, by lowering electricity prices, and by giving, at least for a few years, also subsidies, especially when it comes to renovation of houses.
Thank you, and that's again the question I would like to mirror at Karen. And remember, I sort of started this session by saying it costs more not to respond to the climate crisis than it costs to respond. That is okay when we're talking about nations, that's okay when we talk about big entities, but the individual can or should not be able, or is afraid of not being able to foot the bill. So how can we find a mechanism that will take those along that will lose?
I mean, the question of losing is especially relevant in the short and medium term. I think we also have to stress that. And once the system is transformed, you have only green energies, you have new technologies into the system, then it's not necessarily more expensive anymore. But the process of getting from A to B, that can be the painful thing. On the one hand, it can get more expensive, like driving your fossil-driven or fossil-fueled car, etc. So habits need to change, and that's a different type of cost than is often acknowledged. So there's one thing about the euros, but the other thing is really having to change your behavior, because if you don't change, then it really gets expensive because carbon prices are going up. If you change, then things will not get that expensive because, for example, if you drive an electric car, it's fueled by electricity. Electricity gets greener and greener, so carbon prices won't matter that much. But of course, you have to be able to afford that car, and you have to be able to afford your renovation. So alternatives have to be made accessible. And I think that's one important thing. And many households, they're still just really uncertain. What can I get? Where do I get support? How is this developing? So I think there's one important aspect is really being transparent, being honest about what's coming. Because for a very long time, there was this kind of, at least I'm not sure whether it was intentional, but I think people thought that we would just decarbonize and nothing would change. And e-mobility was kind of a luxury thing, but not anything that everybody had to bother with. And so I think this is kind of like people are starting to realize that a lot of things will change. So you need to be honest, you need to be transparent, but you also have to show where we are going. So it's not all going to be dark, it's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. And making the transition to that feasible to everybody. I think that is something, that's a message that we haven't gotten across yet by paying back from CO2 prices, but also considering the impact to lower income households of certain subsidies or removal of subsidies, if it comes to that. So there's a lot of things where government just has to be transparent. And I think then talking to citizens, giving them the opportunity to pitch in, to have this feeling I'm not completely helpless, I'm not at the mercy of some people up there who don't understand me, I think that can go a long way. At least psychologists suggest that it can go a long way. I'm just an economist, I can't really say. that can go a long way of making things acceptable even if you have to pay for something.
Thank you very much. We're almost coming to an end. I will dare to bring in Hannah with one short statement. What's going to happen in the next 2 years? Never mind who's in the government, what's the Bundesbank going to do as far as greening the financial system is concerned?
Okay. Taking no action is no option. Perfectionism is not the right way to wait for. We have to act now. And here we at the Bundesbank personally will do what we preach. We will disclose, we will stress test ourselves, and we will do our job in giving guidance when we are asking advice to the governments.
Thank you very much. I see in theory we just have 41 seconds. Don't worry, we're going to take a little bit longer because first of all, I would like to thank my panel. I know that we haven't talked about everything and maybe not in depth, but I think that's all that we can actually do in 50 minutes with these diverse aspects. But of course, that's probably what they're doing right at the moment in the negotiations to form a new government, weighing up alternatives, coming to a compromise, maybe as Rabea shared with us earlier, coming to a compromise between different parts of society as represented by the potential next government. So thank you very much, Melanie, Patrick, Karen, and Hannah for having come here, actually physically, live and in person. That's just so beautiful. Maybe we're really on the tail end of COVID-19 and that this kind of conference is possible. And we hope, ladies and gentlemen, that those of you who have actually listened and talked to us will be here next year when we have the prep for the COP27, hopefully with the right results at COP26. We have tried to bring you up to speed with what's to be expected, where on the political level the different nations are going, and we can also say where things are going. And if I find it, I would love to leave you, and there it is, with a quote of certainly one of my most famous journalists and journalists that is covering climate change ever. And I can't say it in his voice, but it's the COP26 President's Advocate, Sir David Attenborough. Just as a quick reminder, the moment of crisis has come. The future of humanity and indeed all life on Earth depends on us. So everybody who's here, everybody's out there, do your best so that we can actually use the window of opportunity in the next couple of years so that not the planet survives, but that we survive on this planet. Till then, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.